Hi guys, so Deidre Brock of the SNP asked George Eustice, the Environment Secretary, a number of questions in Parliament on Monday. And, well, she used an expression that was considered offensive to the Deputy Speaker and to Brexiteers. So let's hear what the expression was.
Now we go to the SNP spokesman, Deidre Brock.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The past 5 weeks have been an absolute nightmare for food exporting businesses. Fishing businesses are facing bankruptcy, dairies can't ship their cheeses, meat was sitting rotting in lorries stuck in customs, small businesses ended mail order deliveries to Northern Ireland, European truckers are refusing UK loads bound for Europe for fear they'll end up stuck in a lorry park in Kent. 40 years of building good customer bases in Europe have been swept away in 1 month by this government's incompetence. The government blamed the companies for not getting the paperwork right, said it was teething problems, or blamed the French, the Dutch, or any other big boy who might have done.
So yes, this is true, that the government have been blaming everyone else. At the beginning, Boris Johnson was even saying, look, companies have not filled out the paperwork correctly, or they didn't have it completed. And of course, it was always about blaming someone else. Blaming the French, of course, for putting up these checks for the pandemic. Then blaming the companies for not having the paperwork right. And then when you ran out of people to blame, instead of actually taking responsibility, Boris Johnson put it down to teething problems.
Done it and run away. Will the government accept that the fault and the blame lie with them, that it's because they made a bollocks of Brexit?
A bollocks of Brexit. Now, you're going to hear George Eustice actually ignore this question, but the Speaker of the House, who actually missed it, it was raised by another MP, she has a few words to say about it. But let's hear the rest of the question and George Eustice's response.
And will they go back to the EU to seek a grace period and new negotiations on market access, even if that means accepting some regulatory alignment?
Secretary of State.
Madam Deputy Speaker, we will not accept regulatory alignment.
So you will not accept regulatory alignment, but you will have to. Now, you can't say, if you want to sell goods into the EU and you want those goods to be bought, then you need to have some sort of alignment. You don't have to align on everything, but on particular goods, there will have to be an alignment. You can't get away from that.
Country voted to become an independent, self-governing country again, to make it...
Okay, there's nothing in the Brexit referendum that mentioned anything about alignment, never mentioned anything about the single market or the customs union, never mentioned anything about leaving those two and the disruption that would take place. There was no mention of a third country either. So the people were voting for Brexit, but they were voting blindly. They didn't know what they were voting for. You can't come back and say, yes, I knew what I was voting for, when there was no mention of a third country. There was no mention of the single market and the customs union. There was no mention of these border checks being put up. There was no mention of tariffs. Actually, the opposite. In many cases, Brexiteers were saying there will be no tariffs, there will be no checks. Everything will flow through as before.
Its own laws again. We were elected as a government on a clear manifesto, a commitment to deliver what people voted for in the referendum. And
no, but there was nothing clear in the referendum. You were actually voted in 2019 to get Brexit done, and Brexit isn't done. Boris Johnson and Michael Gove are talking about speaking with the EU to resolve these issues. In this parliamentary session, George Eustice goes back on his word and he says, we're going to meet with the EU to resolve these issues. But if you're elected to get Brexit done, then obviously Brexit is not done.
And that is what we have done. And of course, there have been teething problems in these early stages as people familiarise themselves with new paperwork. It's not just businesses, it's also border control post inspectors in France and in the Netherlands. They're also on quite a steep learning curve. They are.
But this was all meant to be done before the end of the transition period. The European Union said to the UK, do you want to extend the transition period to make sure that you're ready? And the UK said, no, we don't need to extend the transition period. We will be ready. And the UK is not ready. So if you said you were ready and you're not ready, either you lied or you didn't know what the hell you were doing. Which is it?
Are getting better. We are working with them to iron out difficulties. For instance, the French at one point had said everything needed to be in blue ink. They now accept that that's not correct and that's not...
How is taking back control? This is absurd beyond the extreme. He's saying now the French are listening to us and they understand that things don't have to be in blue ink or in black ink or whatever. If the French were rejecting British goods because of the colour of the ink on the documentation, who has the power there? Can you imagine? Who has the power? An unelected bureaucrat, a customs officer, a French customs officer has more power than the UK government. And he's able to reject an entire consignment because of the colour of the ink that was used in the documentation. Imagine the power that person has. They have more power than the Secretary of State here.
What's required in law. So we're working, of course, to iron out these difficulties, working with authorities in France and the Netherlands. And
sorry, I thought you took back control. I thought Brexit was done. You talked earlier about how you delivered on the mandate of the 2019 election, which was to get Brexit done. And now you're telling us Brexit is not done.
Ireland to try to improve these processes. And yes, of course, we would be willing to have a discussion with the European Commission about how we might modernise some of the forms that they have to make them more user-friendly.
So you're saying, you're begging the EU, please, can you update your forms because we're having problems with them? Now, I don't think this is the issue. The issue is, in reality, the problem on the UK side, there are not enough staff. The systems are not working. They're not integrated. Many systems don't exist yet, and the systems that do exist are old systems that have not been updated to deal with this new type of paperwork. And his response is, let's ignore the real problem and let's ask the EU to update their systems. Now, if the EU turn around and say no, then what do you do? You know, if you had been a member and there was a problem with some sort of system, then you could put pressure on the European Union within the European Union. You're outside now. You're a third country. Maybe George Eustice doesn't understand this. You have no power. You can ask, you can plead, you can try and threaten, but at the end of the day, who has the power?
Friendly.
Now we go to Thurska Moulton. To Kevin Holland.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I didn't realise bollocks was parliamentary language, but obviously...
Well, it has been introduced into the vocabulary of Parliament.
That's for you to decide. But
on the matter of unparliamentary language, the honourable gentleman is quite right to question the matter. The honourable lady uttered a phrase which, although I would not have allowed it had she directed it specifically at any individual member of this House.
She was just directing it at the government. It was clever not to direct it at the Secretary of State himself, but she did direct it at the government.
I didn't interrupt her in the way in which she used it in her question, but I do remind all honourable members that regardless of whether they are participating virtually or physically, they ought to be very careful never to use any language which could be considered offensive.
Okay, I find this hilarious because Boris Johnson lies in Parliament every time he's there. Every time he's in Parliament, he lies, and he's never held to account. He can say whatever the hell he wants, and the opposition can try to hold him to account, but they are limited in their power. The Speaker of the House never intervenes and says, I'm sorry, Prime Minister, you told a lie there. Do you want to correct it? The strongest I've heard the Speaker of the House say to Boris Johnson is something like when he he misused the name of the SNP. He mispronounced, or he used the wrong words to describe the SNP. That's the strongest I've heard. So Boris Johnson can lie through his teeth every time he's in Parliament, and that's perfectly fine. But use the word bollocks, and we have some limits, people. It's absurd. And I think it actually demonstrates that truth and honesty have no place in Parliament. How is it possible that the Prime Minister can just continually lie and there's no punishment? Now, I don't think there's going to be any punishment for this SNP MP for using the word bollocks, but at the end of the day, which is more serious? A word or an action? I think an action is much more serious. Let me know in the comment section, guys, what you think. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks a lot. I want to say a big thank you to all of my patrons. You ensure that this channel continues to exist. I'm eternally grateful for all of your support. If you join Patreon, you will receive instant access to our Discord server, where we have both audio and video chats. You can chat with me and other patrons, where we discuss important and non-important issues. Becoming a patron per month costs about the same as a large coffee, so why not check it out?